Fox's Melrose Place was intended to be an introspective drama about young adult life in 1990s LA. But by season 2, the show leaned into its soapy elements, with ever-shifting love triangles, backstabbing office rivalries, and more than a few iconic villains stealing babies, faking pregnancies, and even blowing up the apartment complex. At its height, the show reached nearly 15 million viewers, and its young and restless stars were everywhere. The show ended on a whimper in 1999 and had a mediocre CW revival in 2009, but for this Patreon-sponsored episode, we're going to Melrose, as the great pop culture debate seeks to determine the best Melrose Place character. What can I say? When God was passing out business sense, I was in the back of the line with Jane, getting my nails done. I'm your host, Eric Rezsnyak. Please welcome my panelists for this episode. First up, he beat cancer in 47 minutes to be with us today, if you take out commercial breaks and interstitials. Please welcome our Patreon sponsor for the episode, Bob Erlenback.
Oh, God, lymphoma. Let's hope I don't catch that again.
And just like Amanda Woodward, he liked this episode so much, he bought the building. Next, she once held a Melrose Place watch party in which she served Amanda wood-fired pizza with a side of Matt Field greens. Please welcome to the podcast, Courtney Fay.
Thanks, Eric. I still have some leftovers. They're wrapped in Joe Reynolds wrap.
I hear they manufacture that in New York City. And finally, he's the Sydney Andrews to my Jane. Please welcome my ne'er-do-well little brother, Todd Rezsnyak.
I do remember you and I tussling and falling into a pool once while I was wearing a wedding dress.
That's right, because you're a prostitute, Todd.
Sex worker.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you're curious about how we ended up with this spelling 16, become a Patreon supporter of the podcast or listen to the 3-minute primer available wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can head to this episode on greatpopculturedebate.com to find the listener bracket as well as video clips featuring most of these characters so you can play along with us at home. And with that out of the way, I hear the guitars wailing, so let's start fucking with these debates. First up, it's the first of several unanimous decisions this round, as it was a redhead smackdown with the kid sister from hell, Sydney Andrews, the clear victor over late season edition Lexi Sterling. But I do want to say something on behalf of Lexi before we let her go. I personally think Lexi's a solid character, and she was played well by Jamie Luner, who was herself seeking refuge from her own failed primetime soap, Savannah. She showed up in season 6 as the show continued its nosedive into mediocrity and musical chair relationships, but none of that was Lexi's fault. If anything, she was something of a secondary female lead, albeit one with a wildly vacillating moral compass. Lexi's defining characteristics were that she was A, Southern, B, a daddy's girl, and C, had terrible taste in men. I mean, seriously, Coop, Peter, Ryan, and Michael, that's duds all the way around, lady. Next, the panel is evenly split between two women with a lot in common. Their names both begin with J, they both fucked Jake Hansen, and they both bailed on the show when the ship started to sink. Bob, frame your argument for gritty New York fashion photographer Joe Reynolds. Courtney, design a way forward for bad news buffet fashionista Jane Mancini. Bob, please go first.
Okay, so first of all, I think actually these two characters, at least in my opinion for me, I think are pretty evenly matched just in just overall quality and just overall character for the entire show. Do I think either of them are going to win this whole bracket? Oh, God, no. Absolutely not. But I find Joe to be the more compelling character of the two. There's a phrase we often use on this podcast that's from another spelling event called Soap Dish, is that Joe is and always will be our queen of misery. She flees not one, not two, but 3 men who are abusive to her. Her baby is kidnapped by Kimberly. Life in her show just, it shits on this woman. Someone shot her hair. She's the daughter of King Roland, king of the Druids. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my Spaceball script. Excuse me. 1 second. Of the women, to me, it's interesting because of the women, I think she's the one I wouldn't want to be left alone with because she would fuck me up if she was pissed off. But when it comes to men, she's always in an abusive relationship. But she sucker punched and beat the shit out of Kimberly in a hospital when she stole her baby and turned her and let the Carters, I think it was the Carters.
I think it's the Carters, yeah.
The Carters, let the Carters know that, she was an unstable mother. Oh, when Joe throws the chair through the glass window, through the sliding glass door to claim back her baby, it's just, chef's kiss. Joe Reynolds for president, everyone.
Hey, you could do worse.
It's true.
Excellent. Courtney, talk to us. I mean, also on the bad news buffet line, it's Jane. Talk to us, Courtney, about Jane.
Okay, so In the Jane versus Joe Reynolds rap, I think Jane is better because she misleads people and she into believing she's good and innocent, right? And so here all along we always kind of sympathize and feel for Jane, but really she's a terrible bitch and she is going to throw her sister Sydney under the bus at any chance she gets, and she's going to trash Michael Mancini but marry him again, and she's just the worst and parading around as if she's all innocent and naive. And Joe, I think, is supposed to be a badass and supposed to be tough. And I do like that about her. I think she's the character I like more. But I think Jane is probably the better character because she really fools everybody all the way to the end.
That's a great point. Bob, you wanted to retittle that retattle?
Well, and it's something I meant to say, too, and it kind of is a little bit of a retittle to the retattle that she just had, too, is, to me, everything is about what happens to Jane by other people. There is one thing that Jane does, and that she sets Alison's apartment on fire by accident after she's sleeping with Jake. But anyway, that's all. I just wanted to throw that last part in there.
I love it. I love her. Todd, where are you on this one?
I mean, my vote is for Joe. I think that Jane is kind of long-suffering Jane, but it's not at the same level as the shit that Joe went through. Like, admittedly, Joe has terrible, terrible, terrible taste in men. But I do think some of the things that happened to her were generally beyond her control. And when her back was up against the wall, like, she stepped up and she defended herself. She defended her baby. And so, I think she showed that she had a lot of mettle. And I think she showed she was had a deeper character than Jane did.
Okay, so we have 2 for Joe. I think I'm still going to stick with Jane here, only because I like Courtney's argument that Joe is tough, but Jane's almost kind of like a stealth bitch, and I live for a stealth bitch. But we are split, and on a non-poll, we go to tiebreakers. Bob, you're the Patreon sponsor. You get to break the first tie.
Well, I'm not interested in breaking the first tie just yet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my vote to Jane.
Okay. All right. So we will go ahead and push Jane, the stealth bitch Mancini, into round 2. Next, it's another unanimous decision, this time for unrepentant shit Dr. Michael Mancini, who evicted perpetual dweeb Billy Campbell from our bracket. Did anyone want to speak about Billy? Courtney, I know you had some thoughts.
I had some thoughts, especially as a middle schooler watching Billy, who was a professional soccer player in real life. And so I had a crush on Billy. Plus, Billy is the good guy, right? He's got a moral compass, and he's very ethical, and he likes Alison. And so, yeah, I really, really liked Billy a lot, but he doesn't at all qualify as the best character in Melrose Place.
Agreed with that. Bob, you wanted to mention something about Billy?
He divorced his wife and let her drown in a pool, Courtney. I think that you need to rethink your choices. No, anyway, he never worked for me, and for some reason, Amanda and Alison were always just jumping all over each other to get at Billy. It's just like, Billy's like the best thing ever. And I'm like, I don't get it. So anyway, that's all.
I did.
I also just feel bad for anybody who had to share a scene with him because he gave them nothing to work
It was
with.
like talking to a wall.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I have to say, like, I was going to point out, even when we were watching it in the 90s, I remember saying, like, Andrew Shue, who's the actor, has a limited reservoir with acting. And once his is depleted, he starts to draw from whoever is on the screen with him. You can watch them die inside. And he makes everyone around him worse. I genuinely believe that's true. Courtney, you mentioned his moral compass. I had forgotten that after Brooke's death in season 4, Billy has his like bad boy period where he's sleeping with clients and stuff. He's such a bad actor. I didn't even realize that's what was happening. Like,
Same. I didn't recall any of that when I researched it.
I was like, Billy had a bad boy phase, but apparently did. But he's basically a piece of plywood. Would have given you more than Andrew Shue. So goodbye, Billy. We don't miss you. Next, 3/4 of the panel are scheming to keep delusional vixen Taylor McBride in the running, but Todd has a soft spot for hooker with a heart of gold, Megan Lewis. I know, the term is sex worker, but that doesn't work with heart of gold. Todd, tell us why you'd like to escort Megan into round 2. Courtney, put those lips to work and make sure that Taylor eats this bitch up. Todd, please go first.
As you said, I'm clearly an outlier on this, but I really did enjoy Megan, especially as one of the characters that was later introduced to the show. I just didn't connect with a lot of the later characters, but I did like her. I felt like she was one of the ones that had kind of the most genuine heart, though admittedly I don't remember a ton of what she did or didn't do. I know she came on the show because she was hired by Kimberly as a sex worker to sleep with Michael when Kimberly could not have sex with Michael. But, you know, like you said, she was a sex worker. She had that kind of whirlwind romance of sex worker to married to a doctor kind of fairy tale story. I did feel like she had just some of the more redeeming qualities of any of the characters on the show. I think that there's certainly a place on a soap opera for plenty of insane characters doing insane things. It was nice to have somebody who wasn't, at least I felt, wasn't so extreme all the time.
I think that's a great argument for her because she may have been the only non-crazy person on that show. Like, I don't recall Megan being aggressively malicious towards anyone. She definitely got in her shots, especially in the later seasons, but she was never starting shit. She was more, like, putting it down. That being said, has he changed anyone's mind? Courtney, you sticking with Taylor here.
I'm going to stick with Taylor. I do agree, though. Like, Megan was like a breath of fresh air in all the crazy abductions and murders and murder plots and drownings. There was Megan, who just seemed somewhat genuine. So it was a nice breath of fresh air, but that's not what we're voting for here, right? We're voting for the best. And Taylor, who moves her husband to California from Boston because she's secretly Peter's ex or brother, sister-in-law, ends up falling in love with Peter and then somehow finding out that, you know, Michael is her baby daddy. Like, she's really the badass, I think, over Megan any day if we're going to talk about the best character in Melrose Place.
Bob, where are you? Are you with Taylor or are you with Megan?
Todd asked, like, he wasn't really sure what Megan, he couldn't really think of what some of the things that Megan contributed. She did contribute barrettes. She always had her hair pulled back in little barrettes. It was like, Here Comes Megan, sponsored by Claire's. I just want to point out, Taylor's about to sail through with a 3-1, and thinking about Eric does this thing on the show where he tries to gaslight everybody into getting his pick to the final, similar to the way Taylor likes to gaslight.
As Taylor once said to Amanda, oh, God, you're so predictable.
It's true.
Yeah, I'm sticking with my Taylor, as you put it. So she will be advancing into round 2. Next, it's another unanimous victory, this time for ball-busting ad exec Amanda Woodward, who easily bounced Michael's annoying little sister Jennifer Mancini out of the bracket. But I'd least like to mention Jennifer. So Jennifer is honestly most notable for being played by Alyssa Milano in between her kiddie days on Who's the Boss and her adult role in Charmed. She showed up for seasons 5 through 7. We watched Milano grow up on screen, and unfortunately, nobody bothered to tell her we could also watch the hair on her upper lip grow on screen, because this poor woman literally had what appeared to be a mustache for a good chunk of her first season. It's even more apparent in HD. Love you, Alyssa Milano, kind of. You're also kind of complicated right now, but whatever. I guess we like you. As a character, Jennifer was largely defined by the men in her life. Michael, as her older brother, begrudgingly helping her out of her messes. Kyle, the guy she had an affair with before they both even ended up on the show. Craig, the douchebag she got involved with after his wife got run over. And ultimately Billy, who she bizarrely ended up with when they decided to move to Rome. None of it makes a lot of sense. Milano was fine. With that being said, Amanda moves on and Jennifer gets bounced. Next, the majority of the panel wants to stand shirtless, staring into a refrigerator, and for the Complex's resident honk Jake Hansen to advance to round 2. But Bob wants to blackmail us into supporting scheming brat Brooke Armstrong. Bob, don't slip as you make your case for why Brooke should make a splash into round 2. I'll rack my balls as I shoot for Jake. Bob, please go first.
So I'll be clear. Ultimately, I'm going to vote for Jake, but I feel like we need to talk about Brooke. And if we all want to go around with an in memoriam to discuss our favorite things about Brooke, we absolutely can do that. But some of my favorite things are... Well, let me say this. First of all, when she came in, when I first watched this show, I guess is what I should say, I thought she was terrible. She was annoying. All of these things, like Kristen Davis plays her. I thought her acting was terrible. When I was rewatching for all of this research to get prepared for this episode, I absolutely fucking love her. I think she's great now. And I can actually see some elements of Charlotte in her. Just it's a nasty Charlotte versus a nice Charlotte, right? But she comes swooping in to D&D. She somehow climbs her way to the top, trampling Alison, trampling Amanda. She has a rich daddy. She's a spoiled rich girl. She's whiny and bitchy in that way. But I think what we know her best for is she ends up marrying Billy and then ends up divorcing Billy, going completely crazy ex-girlfriend on his ass, to the point where she shows up at the apartment complex when Billy and Alison and Jake and Jane are heading out for, I assume, a double date. And she's like, "Where are you going?" And she's drunk. And so she comes in and she's like, "Oh, where are y'all going?" "Oh, we're going out to dinner." And they're like, "Brooke, you're drunk." And she goes, "I'm doing my best Alison impression." And she then proceeds to, after they leave, walk around the apartment complex saying, "Nobody's home. Nobody cares. Oh, Billy." Then she falls in the pool, hits her head, and dies. So if anyone else wants to say anything about Brooke, we'll pour one out for her.
I fucking love it. Courtney, are you sticking with Jake or are you going with Brooke?
I think I'm going to stick with Jake, but I'm thinking she climbed her way to the top. Wasn't it because her dad knew people on the board and like switched the seats around to get her there?
Her dad was definitely involved in it, and he was married to Alison while she was married to Billy.
That's correct. You're right. Well, she also landed her father as a client for D&D, and he immediately asked for Alison as the rep to represent. And right in the middle of the boardroom, she's like, "But this is my account," right in front of her dad. "Daddy, tell them you want me." It's like, oh my God.
Icon. Todd, are you sticking with Jake or are you going to switch to Brooke?
Oh, no, I'm sticking with Jake. I thought Brooke was super obnoxious. I went back and rewatched some of her scenes too. I don't see what you saw, Bob. I thought she was still super obnoxious. You made a comment about how you didn't really understand how she climbed the ladder and kind of stomped over Alison. To me, stomping over Alison was not a difficult task in that show. She was stomped on by pretty much everybody. But I thought she was way over the top. And the less said about Brooke for me, the better.
I will just point out that the scene where she's smashing the dinner plates and confessing to Billy that, yes, she did go and wreck Alison's apartment while she was blind. Like, that's high camp. That whole scene, I was howling at like 1 o'clock in the morning watching that. But Brooke's dead. She's dead to us. She's out of this bracket, and Jake will advance into round 2. Next, it's another unanimous decision, this time for the psychiatrist most in need of her own mental health assistance, Dr. Kimberly Shaw, who blew up the chances of her one-time paramour, Dr. Peter Burns. Does anyone want to talk about the real Peter Burns? Todd, I know that's one of your favorite.
That is absolutely one of my favorites. I'm sure I'm misremembering this, but I feel it was like the end of the season or it was the end of an episode, and Amanda opens the door to her apartment, and there's a man standing outside, and she asks who he is, and he just says, "I'm the real Dr. Peter Burns." It's like some 80-year-old shriveled guy or something and then they never, ever talk about it again, ever. So somewhere in Melrose land, there is some guy walking around who apparently is the real Peter Burns, and we just never hear from him again.
It is the wildest storyline. I'm so glad we're talking about this because he's brought into the show initially to swindle Amanda out of D&D and then get it handed over to his girlfriend, who's played by Jasmine fucking Guy, by the way. And, like, they drug her with marijuana. Like, he's a full-on bad guy when he's brought on. And he has the most nasty, like, terrible douchebag 90s haircut of all the men in that first season.
100%.
Totally the worst helmet hair. And then he goes on to be like the love of Amanda's life after trying to frame and then swindle and then kill her. And then he goes on to try to kill at least 2 other women on the show. At least 2. Possibly more. Amazing television. That being said, Kimberly will advance into round 2 as she should. Finally, in round 1, the panel is evenly split between 2 messes who can't keep a man, Matt Fielding and Alison Parker. Todd, tell us why you have blind faith in Alison. I will deliver a hearty backslap as I speak of my love for Matt. I'll go first. Matt, or as I refer to him by his Christian name, Gay Matt, was an OG cast member with Doug Savant playing the character from season 1 until he left in season 6. You also cannot underplay how significant it was to have an openly out gay man as a lead character on a network television show in 1992. That was a huge deal. As you might expect, most of Matt's plot lines related to his homosexuality, which was still novel in pop culture at the time. You had the old green card marriage, employment discrimination, more than once, gay bashing, more than once, closeted boyfriends, a don't ask, don't tell plotline that ends terribly, fighting with his parents, HIV/AIDS scares. He did get a few gloriously soapy plotlines when his married paramour murders his wife and then frames Matt for it. Amazing. And then he got a pill addiction from, check notes, meningitis? Okay. Matt ultimately left the show to move to San Francisco with his niece, and I would like to believe that he embraced his destiny as a pass-around party bottom. But then the final indignity, they killed him off camera when he died in a car accident. But in the ultimate gay move, his death led to his journal full of secrets about his friends and neighbors being used as a plot device for the final season. And what is more gay than petty than that? That being said, Todd, talk to us about Alison.
It's tough to follow that up.
I know, but it's fucking Alison Parker, so...
I mean, for me, Melrose Place, I feel like it started and ended with Alison. Like, she was that character that you were first introduced to. And so, I don't know, it felt to me like the early episodes in the first season really seemed to focus on her. And yeah, she was a mess from day one. Her on-again, off-again bullshit with Billy was annoying. She was a mess at times. She was annoying, but I do think that Courtney Thorne-Smith played her with a sincerity that I did find to be rather charming. I thought that she had some pretty iconic looks, like, when she'd be in arguments with people or she'd get, a zinger thrown at her and she'd just kind of like stick her tongue out a little bit or like kind of like...
The tongue flicking. The tongue flicking.
Yeah, the tongue flick. And honestly, she was able to kind of hold her own now and then, though it was... I took a lot of pleasure in trying to watch her stand up to Amanda the times that she tried, and to see her get batted down time after time like a cat with a mouse. But so, I think that she just was again, just like with Megan, she was more of a grounded character. And a soap opera, yeah, it's great to have those characters that are out there and wild, but you do need to have somebody to center it. And for me, those first few seasons, that was Alison.
Very good point. Very good point. Courtney, where are you on this one?
Well, I always found that I liked the Alison Billy line because I was always having fun watching Billy. But she's just so awful. Like, she's not good at anything. Like, Amanda beats her down every single time, and it's like no matter how hard you root for Alison, she just can't stand up for herself. So, it's definitely a vote for Matt for me.
Bob, where are you on this one?
I think I was initially voting for Matt. Looking in my research, he's kind of a sad sack. Mm-hmm. And I think Alison is to a certain regard as well, but doing my research for this, something tipped the scales for me, and I think Todd gave a great argument for Alison, let me say that. But something tipped the scales in my research where she was blinded by the explosion.
Yes.
Right.
Brooke rearranged the furniture, which was epic.
Yep.
And this character was treated so badly by all of the characters on this program that when she was blind, they treated her wonderfully, and they gave her everything she needed, that when she regained her sight, she pretended to still be blind because people were being nice to her. That is icon behavior right there. So I'm going to give it to Alison.
Amazing. Todd, did you have something else to say there?
Well, I have to say, like, when I started, researching this, too, I was very dismissive of Matt. But I do have a deeper appreciation for, just how groundbreaking in some ways that character was. Even if he was ultimately a sad sack, it was still representation when, for so long there really wasn't any.
That's a fair point.
Agreed.
So you're sticking with Alison?
I am.
So I would stick with Matt here. It doesn't matter. Bob, tiebreaker, who's going forward?
Oh, we'll push Alison forward. Let's
fine with
rearrange
that.
the bracket much like her furniture.
Excellent. The last thing I will say about Matt is that it's important to know that the network would not allow any actual physical romantic connection. So the most you ever got was a hearty backslap. There was a kiss that was filmed that they cut from the season 2 finale. And finally, most people don't know this, Doug Savant, who played him, is very much a heterosexual man. He's so heterosexual that he's married to Laura Layton, a.k.a. Sydney Andrews, in real life, and they have children. So mazel to you. And also very convincing acting because everyone thought he was gay. But he's out now, literally and figuratively, and that's the end of round 1. We're going to take a quick break to write literally the only person of color out of our show between seasons. We'll be right back after these messages.
Listen up, all you groovy cats and cool kittens. Are you tired of being the silent spectator in the grand circus of pop culture? Well, fret not, my fabulous friends. It's time to strut your stuff and shake up the status quo by taking our polls. Let your opinions sashay down the runway of pop culture history like a fierce drag queen at Mardi Gras. Trust me, darlings, it's more thrilling than a game of Twister with the cast of the Brady Bunch. So stop sipping your lukewarm tea and join the fabulous fun. Head to greatpopculturedebate.com and find the polls section. You know I love a good poll.
And we are back for round 2 of our best Melrose Place character debate. Before we get into the Elite Eight, I want our panelists to share their social media, what else they're working on, and then we're going to briefly discuss some of the more prominent Melrose Place guest stars. Bob, you're our Patreon sponsor for this episode. Thank you very much. Why did you sponsor this, and where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at DisnerdBob on pretty much any social platform that you want to find me at. Why did I sponsor this? Well, because I'm a sponsor and I get to pick a topic. So Patreons get lots of great perks. I encourage you guys, listeners, to subscribe to a Patreon if you aren't already. But I picked Melrose Place just because I thought it was going to be fun, and I could pick whatever I want within reason, right? But I knew this is probably a topic that Eric would probably never get to or wouldn't be able to really talk about, and I just knew we'd have a lot of fun talking about this show and talking about characters we probably would never talk about otherwise. So,
well, thank you for it. It's taking me higher, and I have long wanted to do a Dynasty episode, so if this one does well, let us know, and we will do a Dynasty character episode. The winner is very obvious, but I don't care. I would love to talk about it with everybody. So
it's Fallon.
I will say this, Fallon would be top 4. She would be top 4 for me. But thank you very much for that, and thank you for being a Patreon sponsor. Courtney, do you want to share your social media, or?
I don't really have any social media, so I can't.
You're probably for the best. How did you get into watching Melrose Place? I'm curious.
My mom and I would watch it when I was in middle school when it first came out because we were 90210 fans. And I feel like the connection in the beginning with Kelly and Jake got us to tune in.
Yep.
And that started it all.
And here we are. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining this episode. We hope that you had a good time. Toddy, do you have any social that you want to share, or?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me. My name's just Todd Rezsnyak. It's as unoriginal as it gets. Mostly I post slightly burned desserts that I've been making and pictures of my trips to various countries that I go to. So I do need to update, but yeah, I mean, that's mostly what you'll find there.
Great. And how did you start watching Melrose Place?
Let's see. I believe my big brother had an appointment viewing every week with his best friend in high school, and somehow I just got sucked into it.
Thank you. It's important for people to understand that Bob and I, before call waiting, would be on the phone with each other for the entirety of Melrose Place on Monday nights for the whole hour, just talking about what was on TV. That is a thing that happened, and I'm sure our families mutually loved that. But that is how this all started. So thank you. You can find me at Eric Rezsnyak on Instagram, or just message at Great Pop Culture Debate on Insta and TikTok, or at GPCD on Mastodon. But what you really need to do right now is sign up for our weekly newsletter, new every Monday, that tells you about everything new in pop culture that week. Sign up by finding the link on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com or via our link tree on any of our social media accounts. So I want to quickly go over some of the big guest stars that did appear on Melrose Place over its 7 seasons. Linda Gray, who was from Dallas and then was on the Melrose Place spinoff, Models Inc., which we desperately need to talk about at some point because you're in hooker hell, sweetheart. Miss Denise fucking Richards was on this show, lest we forget. Patrick Muldoon as a recurring nightmare of a person who literally was killed but not killed and then tormented the Andrews sisters. Tracy Lords. Bob, you want to talk about her?
Tracy Lords, Ricky. Our wonderful Ricky. She moves into the complex and influences poor Sydney because Sydney needs self-help, which the self-help turns out to be a cult.
Yeah.
So, gotta love Ricky.
It was very hot at the time, cults, yeah. Jag himself, David James Elliott, Donna Mills, Famke Janssen from the X-Men movies was on this show. Gina Gershon was on the show. Jerry Ryan was on the show. Antonio Sabato Jr., Trump mega fan and total loser, was actually Amanda's abusive ex-husband, who she kills. Dr. Joyce Brothers, R.I.P. She just died. She was on there. John Enos, a.k.a. Mr. Cocky from Sex and the City. Bob remembers that one.
Sure do.
He was a wall of flesh coming at Samantha.
That's true.
That's right. Lonnie Anderson, Priscilla Presley, Chad Lowe, Days of Our Lives, Christian Alfonso as Sydney's pimp. Stars. Star-studded. That's what I have to say. Let's move into round 2 before that hussy Sam and her escaped confonder run us over on our wedding day. I still haven't gotten over that justice for Sydney Andrews. And speaking of which, actual justice for Sydney Andrews, as she continues her unanimous victories in round 2 by advancing over her poor, dull sister, Jane. Jane, you ignorant slut. But I do want to speak anything else about Jane before we let her go. Anyone have anything to say? Bob?
One thing we didn't really talk about is her business acumen, or lack thereof. It seemed like she was losing her business left and right, or she was embezzling money unbeknownst to her, or
Constantly.
something like that. She was cooking her books at one point, as Kimberly presented to her. Looks like you're cooking the books, Jane.
I will say that they did bring her back for the last season and a half, I think, and I think she may have appeared in the 2009 reboot on the CW. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe she was just mentioned. But, yeah, Sydney is, as Todd said, a fucking icon. So she will advance to the final 4. Next, in one of our juiciest matchups, the majority of the panel wants to move forward medical Lothario Dr. Michael Mancini, but I am experiencing a bout of rage epilepsy because my darling shitstirrer Taylor McBride may be getting eliminated. Todd, tell us why it would be podcast malpractice to dispense of Michael so early in this debate. I will bash my head against the door and blackmail you all into sticking with Taylor to the end. I'll go first. Lisa Rinna is spectacular in this role. Taylor is, I think, easily the best of the latter season additions, having been introduced in season 5 and then written out shortly into season 7. The important thing about Taylor is that she's one of the only characters on this show that could stand toe-to-toe with Amanda and give her as good as she got. Amanda would still inevitably win, but Taylor got under her skin in a way I don't think Alison, Kimberly, or Sydney ever did. You could tell she drove Amanda nuts, and that made for a great dynamic. The lunacy of this character is awe-inspiring. There are a lot of crazy people on the show, but nobody's crazier like Taylor, because she's like sane, like she can operate as a human being, but she's fucking nuts. The whole Nick, Kyle, Christine storyline is like a Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia board of insanity. She's hilariously unhinged, and Rinna plays her so sincerely, but that was nothing compared to the height of batshit Melrose Place, the rage epilepsy scheme to get and keep Peter, faking domestic violence and a medical condition. You spectacular bitch. There's also the drama behind the scenes. In case you didn't know this, Rinna was not the original actress cast to play Taylor. That was supposed to be Bold and the Beautiful star Hunter Tylo, but she became pregnant shortly after being hired, and the show dismissed her, saying that it wouldn't work for the character. Tylo ended up filing a discrimination suit, emboldened by the fact that the show worked around Locklear's pregnancy after she was a cast member. Tylo went on to win $4.8 million, and the suit is regarded today as an important legal precedent regarding privacy issues. That said, I understand why Michael should ultimately advance here. Courtney, are you sticking with Michael?
I'm sticking with Michael.
Todd, you sticking with Michael?
Yes.
Bob, you sticking with Michael?
You make an incredible argument for Taylor, and if Taylor had a longer tenure on the show where she could deliver on that consistently the way that Michael, from beginning to end, consistently executes on the shenanigans and goings-on that are Michael Mancini, like, I just can't discount that, and I think Michael is a core to this show more than Taylor ever will be. So for those reasons, I'm sticking with Michael.
I respect it. I do. So Michael will advance, and we bid adieu to Taylor McBride. Next, it's another unanimous victory for Amanda Woodward, whose big D&D energy emasculated even construction stud Jake Hansen. We haven't really talked about Jake at all. Anybody have anything they want to say about him? Courtney?
I feel like Jake was there strictly to be the bad boy, and he consistently
and to own
delivers
shooters
for us. Yeah, and various bikes or car dealerships, right? Like, didn't he work in bikes and cars? And
He did, yes.
with Amanda's,
Amanda's dad, and then the FBI pressured him into being an informant against him.
Apparently, they gave him a bonus for that. Like, here's some money because you were an informant.
I think they gave him
the bike
the
shop.
boat. The boat, I think.
Oh, the boat. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he
Which
gets
they-
like $50,000 as like a reward from the FBI or some shit, and he buys something.
The boat, and then
yeah.
Kathy Ireland tries to kill him on the boat, but then they reverse it and they're going to blackmail Amanda's father, and then she blows. It's a whole thing. It's a fucking thing.
The whole boat blows up.
The whole boat blows up. Todd, did you have anything to say about Jake?
No, I agree with Courtney. I think, he was clearly meant to be like the bad boy and kind of the muscle. I mean, you saw him kind of step in and try to protect some of the female characters. Like I, was rewatching scenes where he rescued Sydney from a bar where they were trying to force her to do a hot bra contest. And of course, he was the guy that could put up his dukes and go engage in the fisticuffs with the tough guys. But you wouldn't have seen that with Billy. You wouldn't have seen that with Michael. I mean, he was that guy that would allow them to have some man fights and not just the women slapping each other or slapping the men's. So
that's a great point. Everybody else was a sensitive new age guy, and then you have Jake, who's just pumping iron and flexing. Bob, anything to say about Jake?
No, but first of all, of course, Sydney was in a bar with a hot bra contest. Why wouldn't she be? Anyway,
I will point out that Jake successfully nailed almost every member of the female cast: Sandy, Joe, Sydney, Jane, Amanda, and Alison. He's like the Thanos of Melrose Place leading ladies, collecting his gems. And I do think that Grant Show was very good in the role. Like, he had to be both hot but also like a decent human being, and Jake is probably the most decent guy on that show by the end of it. I mean, Billy there was nothing left. There was nothing to that man by the time he left, but Jake at least you could root for. So that being said, we're not rooting for him that much because Amanda is advancing to the Final Four, and it is yet another unanimous victory, this time for deranged Dr. Kimberly Shaw, who listened to her imaginary friend Henry and axed Alison Parker out of the competition. But I know we haven't said enough about Alison. Bob, take it.
We talked about her tongue flicking in the first round, which is iconic. But one of the other things, and you will, as the listener, you will not be able to unsee this once I say it, is at the time when this aired, there was a promotional campaign through Taco Bell, and it was called Taco Head. Taco Head. And what it was that your head was getting stuck into a tilted, because whenever you have to eat a taco, you have to tilt your head. And if you watch Alison, she has perpetual taco head. She is always tilting her head, giving a scowl, flicking her tongue, always with the taco head. So much so that we referred to her always as Alison Taco Head. So that's all I have to say about Alison.
I never knew that that's where that came from.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing I will say about Alison is, I think Courtney alluded to this. When the show started, Alison was like our entry point character. We were all supposed to be like, oh, I like that Alison girl. I'm rooting for her. And then at the time, I did. During the 90s, I was like, yeah, I want Alison to succeed. Watching it again like a decade later, I was like, oh my God, she's the fucking worst. Like, she's an insufferable, incompetent boob who makes terrible decisions. Like, constantly. We said that Jane and Joe are bad news buffets, but like, Alison makes consistently poor choices. Constantly, including, by the way, in the iconic opening credits to the show, the season 1 Courtney Thorne-Smith headshot is insane. Like, her hair is like a sculpture. It's Olin Mills glamour portrait realness. It's insanity. Everybody else looks great, and there she is, like fucking, what did you call it? A Laura Ashley nightmare, Bob? Is that what?
I didn't call it that, but what did I refer to it as? She it'll come back to me. Continue.
Rolled out of Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, she rolled right out of Little House on the Prairie. And I was watching some with Courtney in preparation for this, and she was like getting up in the morning in her pajamas, and she has this full she's like got an Egyptian headdress on practically in the morning. The way that her hair is, it's like the budget on Melrose Place on the Aquanet must have been through the roof to keep her hair that crisp and that tight. So,
but you know what they didn't apparently have the budget for? Fucking hot oil treatments for Heather Locklear, because that hair was fried, honey.
It was a constant and perpetual blowout. Come on.
Constantly terrible. But back to Alison. She is the worst. She, like, I can find things to find endearing about pretty much every other woman on the show, but not fucking Alison. And it will remain a delight to me that Heather Locklear Amanda Woodward dog walks this woman every scene. It's just like just casual, just walking by, just punch her right in the cooter verbally. Magnificent. So with that being said, we have our final four. We're going to take a quick break to check on what Kimberly is doing down in the laundry room. It's not what it looks like. It's worse. Kaboom. We'll be right back after these messages. Do you want to watch more TV? Sure, we all do. But sometimes you just don't have the time to tune in, and you're still itching to know what happened. Well, for $0 a day, you can check out the Great Pop Culture Debate episode recaps. We cover some of your favorite television franchises so you can stay up to date without even watching. Head over to the blog section of greatpopculturedebate.com and make sure you never miss a moment. And we are back with the final four of our best Melrose Place character debate. At this point in the show, I'd like to take a step back and see if it shook out the way I expected to. We have a final four of Sydney Andrews versus Dr. Michael Mancini, Amanda Woodward versus Dr. Kimberly Shaw. I think those are unequivocally the four best characters on this show. I think that's 100% accurate. I do think it's interesting that of those four, only one is an original cast member, and the version of him that existed in season one bears virtually no relation to the character that we knew for the vast majority of the run and the reason that we love him. So before we get into that, Todd, you made a great point in the break. There is a character kind of that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, I think the music, in particular the guitar, really, it's really just the guitar, the squealing guitar. That was, to me, that was just as iconic as, Alison Taco Head, or, Ed the whatever. I will say that the music, there were plenty of times that scenes wouldn't land. Dialogue would be, cheap, cheesy. The plot twists were a little predictable or whatever. But you would hear that squealing guitar as it faded to black and played into commercial. And it kind of sold you on the scene.
100% agree. Bob, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think in accompanying to the music, and we joked about it in my intro too, those interstitials, those slow motion recap with the blue filter overlay to them with our like with that guitar over it, so good. It's such a aesthetic of this program that you do not get with shows today ever.
No. It's so 90s, and we love that. Okay. Excellent. Great points. So let's get into these debates. We have Sydney Andrews versus Dr. Michael Mancini. I'm going to start with Bob. Where are you on this one?
Oh, God, that's tough, but I think I got to give this one to Sydney.
Okay, we'll go around. Courtney, is it Sydney or is it Michael for you?
It's Michael for me all the way. I mean, yeah, he's my favorite worst character.
He is so great at being a shithead. Todd, is it Sydney or is it Michael?
I think I have to give the edge to Michael on this. As the only person to be on the show from the very beginning to the very end, I think that says something. And I think he was, he may not have been the most overtly evil on the show, but I feel like he was probably the most unapologetic when he did shitty things.
Going back to Sydney real quick, Sydney's a really interesting character for me when I look at the show as a whole, because I think you can step back and actually see this character as an actual human and real person. She is that black sheep. She is that person that is constantly trying to make good to her sister, just make good in the world. But she constantly fucks up time and time again, just trying to scramble and get herself ahead. She gets herself tied up into so many weird things, and yes, she does some heinous stuff too, and she's mean to people along the way, but overall it's that real black sheep relatability to her as a character that she exists in real life. And I think Michael is so caricatured and becomes more and more caricatured, which I think is something we love about Melrose Place in and of itself, but there's just something relatable, there's something that tangible about Sydney that just makes her special. And let's face it, when she died, we all gasped, right? And it was really impactful. And I don't know as though other characters would have that same kind of impact, because you just couldn't connect with them at certain points, and by the end of most of their arcs, you really just couldn't connect with these characters. So I think that's what makes Sydney pretty special.
Great argument. And I will point out that A, I don't think the show ever recovered from Sydney's death. B, I think the show knew that that was the truth because they brought her back from the dead for the 2009 reboot. And if you haven't been reading up on this, there is another reboot in the works currently that they're shopping around with Sydney and Joe and Amanda. And Sydney's also back from that after also being killed in the 2009 version. So, like, the show on a meta level understands that Sydney has to be there for it to work. I think that's a great point. But I also take the arguments that, like, Michael, I can't think of another character on a nighttime show that is gleefully as evil as Michael, except for maybe J.R. Ewing. Like, there is something, but Michael makes it, I guess J.R. was also comical, but there's the scene where Michael has served Kimberly divorce papers. I have no idea which version of the divorce this is. There's like 14, but they're staying in a hospital off hallway, and like, Kimberly's distraught. She's completely wrecked by this. And Michael is just cold as ice, but delivers it with almost this like smirk. And I'm like, this is camp. This is really funny stuff, even if it's brutal. Like, Thomas Calabro, we haven't even mentioned the actor who plays it, like, was very good in this role. And I think they gave him more of that type of meaty stuff to work with as the show went on. But that being said, Laura Layton was not supposed to be a main character on this series. She only became a main character because they loved what she was doing so much. Like, that's someone who took a day player rate and turned it into something major, which not a lot of characters did. So, Bob, you're sticking with Sydney. I'm
going to stick with Sydney.
Okay. Todd, you're sticking with Michael.
Well, see, now, I don't know. Like, this is tough. I think you both brought up some really good points. With Bob, I think you're right that, like, Sydney was probably one of the most relatable, like, one of the people that you could actually envision in real life. And I do think that there's something to be said for, like, watching the show when it first was on, 30 years ago? And watching it now, like, it's a very different experience. You know, like, the things that we enjoyed, maybe the things that I would cackle at, maybe I don't cackle at as much now that I'm, older and I've got some life experience, and you see what some people have kind of actually gone through. And I think your point is well taken about how Michael really was kind of a caricature. And I think, Eric, you had a really great point, which is that, in every incarnation of the show, Sydney, was kind of a focal point of it. Like, so much so that they brought her back from the dead twice. So, I mean, I think I'm going to switch my vote to Sydney.
Take that, Sam, you fucking bitch. Courtney, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say, to your point of rewatching, I hated Michael when I watched the series originally. But again, like I've said, I always followed kind of the good characters, right? Like Billy and Alison. But rewatching it, I just am loving the caricature that Michael is. And the fact that I know we say he's the model couple in the beginning of the series, but really it's only like episode 1. And it starts to go downhill really, really quickly with Michael. And I kind of just love to see what he'd do and say next, and that everybody just took it and kept loving him and wanting him back anyways. And so it is the rewatch that made me appreciate the camp that is Michael Mancini's character.
Yeah, it is totally camp. I did have a couple other things that we haven't even talked about with some of these characters. Sydney and Michael are probably tied for blackmail attempts over the course of the show, but I'm giving the advantage to Sydney here because she only had like 2 seasons to Michael's 7. Like, Sydney did great work, like national achievement in blackmail. The scene where she's blackmailing Amanda and Michael and Peter when they're in some Japanese tea room and she's in full-on geisha garb, it's fantastic. We talked about the Sydney joining a cult. We didn't talk about her running a prostitution ring. We called that hustle in 2020s. That's what I'm going to say. We didn't talk about Sydney spiking Jane's drink, which leads her to a paralyzing stroke. And then they have a full whatever happened to baby Jane storyline. And then finally, Sydney and Jane basically do a Goodbye Earl before that song even existed, murdering Richard Hart after he beats and rapes Jane. Right. Michael, that being said, did all of those things and infinitely more. The level of cruelty with Michael, I think actually, I don't know if anybody is on the same page as Michael when it comes to just gleeful cruelty at ruining people's lives. We mentioned this when we were recording, but how many women did Michael end up marrying because they wanted to kill him? Like, literally, multiple women seduced Michael strictly to kill him. It's incredible. But I still have Courtney on Michael, and I think, Bob and Todd on Team Sydney. Is that correct? Yep. I don't want to have a tie, so I'm going to give it to Sydney because I think they're both very good here. I'm sorry, Courtney. I know he's your ultimate pick. But going down to Sydney, you could do worse. Were you going to say something else, Bob? Mm-mm. Okay. Finally, in the final four, it's Amanda versus Kimberly. I think this one's actually easier than we think it might be. I'm going to start at the back of the pack with Todd. Is it Amanda or Kimberly?
For me, it's going to be Kimberly. I think when this first got pitched, the concept of the Melrose Place, best characters, like immediately I just thought of a couple of like iconic moments, and it was Kimberly blowing up the building. It was Kimberly removing the wig with the giant scar. I mean, like those images were just kind of, that was the first thing that came top of mind. And so for me, the show would not have been what the show ultimately was without that character of Kimberly. That being said, I think that she stayed, as long as she should not have stayed until the end for sure. I think she was on the show, for the amount of time that was right. But like that show, I just don't think it would be remembered the same way today if Kimberly hadn't been on it.
Excellent points. Courtney, is it Amanda or is it Kimberly?
I picked Amanda, and on my rewatch, I don't know, I do see a lot, and Todd, you make a very good point about Kimberly, but I did originally pick Amanda. I don't know, I'm thinking right now, I might be second guessing.
You are totally open to change your votes. That's part of the fun, is the compelling argument switching you. So I'll circle back. Bob, are you with Amanda or are you with Kimberly?
So let's go through the resume, shall we? With regards to Kimberly. An expert at psychological manipulation, attempted murders, attempted murder of Michael multiple times. Kidnapping babies, drugging Peter. That's all before getting to blowing up an apartment complex. It's worse than you think, everyone. So, a simple YouTube search in my research brought, when you search Kimberly Melrose Place, the first 6 or 7 videos is Kimberly threatens Michael. Kimberly threatens Sydney. Kimberly threatens Matt. Kimberly threatens Joe. I'm just like, this bitch is delivering chaos and crazy at a master class level. She has multiple personalities. Rita, Betsy. I'd forgotten about Rita altogether. She's the badass, and Betsy's the most Brie Vandekamp of her multiple personalities, for sure. But the writers had a field day with this character. Kimberly to me is everything, an icon. I just love her.
Great. Courtney, have you been swayed?
I think so. I loved Amanda's tagline, "The bitch Mondays are a bitch," but I think Kimberly. I'm going to switch my vote to Kimberly.
Here's the thing. I'm with Kimberly here. I think it's the correct answer. And we haven't talked about, Marsha Cross acted the fuck out of that role. This was a chicken shit gig, and she was giving you everything she had, and she really ate that scenery in a really compelling way. Even when the material was not that good, Marsha Cross was still excellent every scene. Without Amanda and Heather Locklear, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Melrose Place would have ended at the end of season 1. She 100% shaved that show. Literally ratings doubled from when she came on to the next season. She's quintessential to it. The problem is Amanda was turned into a bitch, and we loved her as a bitch, but they had to soften her as it went on. And by the time you got to seasons 5, 6, 7... I don't even know who Amanda was anymore. They tried to make her bitchy again, but it didn't work because you knew she wasn't a bitch. It was just kind of a mess. Kimberly's 37 different flavors of crazy, and every one of them is delicious. So I think it is correct that Kimberly move on here, which gives us a final 2 of Sydney Andrews versus Kimberly Shaw. Again, redheads running the world. I want to start in the middle with Courtney. Is it Cindy? Is it Sydney or is it Kimberly?
I think I'm going to give it to Kimberly because she knew what she was doing all along, whereas Sydney just fell into her chaos.
That's a great point. Todd, is it Kimberly or is it Sydney?
Again, iconic moments. It makes me think of Kimberly. I think that, Sydney, great character. But, when I think of the iconic stuff of Melrose, I think of Kimberly. I really do.
Bob, is it Kimberly or Sydney?
It is probably the toughest choice I've had on one of these brackets in a very long time because I love both of these women so much, these characters. I think I have to edge it to Kimberly because she blew up the building, because she was all those levels of crazy. I think I feel really good about the argument I made for Sydney in the last round, and I think that's everything that Sydney is. But I think that while Kimberly is still somewhat of a character similar to Michael, I think she's a little less gleeful and campy, although she is certainly campy. She's more of what those Melrose Place moments that you remember all really revolve and associate with Kimberly. Those are the things that people conjure in their mind when they think of this program, are the things that Kimberly did, right? So I think that's where I am. I'm going to stick with Kimberly.
I'm going to give it a clean sweep. I agree that while Amanda made Melrose Place, Kimberly ultimately is the best thing that came out of Melrose Place. Like, that as a character, there's no one that touches it, even though there are some very good, crazy people on this show and they made for wonderful television. So there you have it. Our pick for the best Melrose Place character is Dr. Kimberly Shaw. Do you agree? Do you think we should disappear forever like Sandy? Tell us how you really feel by leaving a comment on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or Mastodon. While you're there, make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast so you can hear about what new debates are coming soon, vote in open polls, and even decide which topics we tackle next. If you really enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to like and rate it on whatever platform you listen on. I want to say thank you to my panel. Let's all go for a dip in the complex pool. It's been at least a few days since the last time someone died in it. And thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get even more exclusive content and you get episodes a whole day early. We hope you have a good one, and remember, everyone is entitled to their wrong opinions. Cue the swelling guitars and the black and white slow-mo replay.